with the recitation from the Holy Quran. I now request my friend and fellow colleague, Mr. Javed Akhtar, Department of Persian, to please recite few verses of the Holy Quran.
Thank you, Zaib sir. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. Translation. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Read in the name of your Lord, who created man from a clot of blood. Read your Lord, the most bountiful one, who taught by the pen, taught man he did not know, taught man what he did not know. Sadaqallahul Azim. Thank you.
Thank you, Javed sir. I would now like to invite our Vice Principal, Faculty of Arts and HOD, Department of Urdu, Arabic and Persian, Professor Moinuddin Khan sir, to please deliver his welcome address. میری گزارش ہے معین الدین سر سے کہ وہ اپنا ویلکم ایڈریس ڈیلیور کریں.
شکریہ زہیب سر.
جی سر.
السلام علیکم اینڈ گڈ مارننگ ٹو آل. ہمارے مہمان خصوصی، مہمان اعزازی، صدر سیمینار، تمام سامعین کرام، آج کے اس بہترین اور عظیم الشان بین الاقوامی ویبینار میں میں سب سے پہلے اپنے ٹرسٹ، یتیم خانہ و مدرسہ انجمن خیر الاسلام کی طرف سے اور پونا کالج کے تمام اسٹاف، تمام لوگوں کی طرف سے اپنے مہمانوں کا اور آپ تمام سامعین کا، تمام شرکا کا استقبال کرتا ہوں، ویلکم کرتا ہوں. آج کا یہ پروگرام اور آج کا یہ سیمینار یا ویبینار ایک اہم موضوع پر منعقد ہو رہا ہے. مولانا ابوالکلام آزاد حیات اور نظریات یا ان کے افکار و خیالات کے اوپر یہ سیمینار منعقد ہو رہا ہے. ہم سب اس بات سے واقف ہیں کہ ابوالکلام آزاد رحمۃ اللہ علیہ کی شخصیت صرف کسی ایک خاص میدان سے متعلق نہیں تھی، بلکہ مختلف جہات میں ان کی خدمات اور ان کے افکار و نظریات کی روشنی موجود ہے. آپ جہاں ایک طرف سیاسی مدبر ہیں، سیاسی قائد ہیں، وہیں دوسری طرف آپ مفسر بھی ہیں. ابوالکلام آزاد ایک انشا پرداز، ادیب اور اس کے ساتھ ہی ساتھ ایک شعلہ بیان، مقرر اور خطیب بھی تھے. اس کے علاوہ آپ مجاہد آزادی کی حیثیت سے انہوں نے اپنی اہم خدمات انجام دی ہیں جو ہم سب کے سامنے نمایاں ہے، اور آپ اسی لیے یہی وجہ ہے کہ ملک کی آزادی کے بعد آپ سب سے پہلے وزیر تعلیم بنے۔ تعلیم کے میدان میں بھی آپ نے نمایاں خدمات انجام دی ہیں۔ آپ کو اسی لیے ریفارمر آف ایجوکیشن کہا جاتا ہے۔ آپ نے کافی نمایاں خدمات انجام دی ہیں، اور اس کے علاوہ آپ سیاسی قائد بھی رہے، اور سیاست کے میدان میں انہوں نے یا سیاسی امور میں ملت اسلامیہ اور ملک کے باشندوں کی آپ نے بہترین رہنمائی فرمائی تھی۔ آپ کے اوپر سینکڑوں کتابیں موجود ہیں، مقالات ہیں، سیمینار ہیں، مختلف موضوعات پر تمام چیزیں مواد موجود ہے، اور میں پونا کالج کے پرنسپل ڈاکٹر آفتاب انور شیخ صاحب کو مبارکباد کا مستحق سمجھتا ہوں کہ انہوں نے اتنے اہم موضوع پر اور اتنی بڑی اور عظیم شخصیت ابوالکلام آزاد پر انہوں نے یہ پروگرام منعقد کیا، اور ساتھ ہی ساتھ ڈاکٹر زہیب صاحب بھی مبارکباد کے مستحق ہیں، انہوں نے اس سیمینار کا انتظام کیا، اور ہم لوگوں کو اور تمام سامعین کو ابوالکلام آزاد کی خدمات، ان کی حیات اور ان کے افکار و نظریات کو سننے کا موقع عنایت کیا۔ صحیح بات تو یہ ہے کہ اس طرح کے سیمینار یا اس طرح کی عظیم شخصیت پر گفتگو اور پروگرام ہونا ضروری ہے، کیونکہ ابوالکلام آزاد ہماری ملت کے اور ملک کے ان محسنوں میں سے ہیں جنہوں نے بہترین رہنمائی فرما کر علمی اور تعلیمی میدان میں نمایاں کارنامہ انجام دے کر ہم سب کی رہنمائی کی ہے اور بہترین روشنی عطا کی ہے، اور وہ قوم جو اپنے محسنوں کو یاد نہیں کرتی وہ مستقبل میں زیادہ ترقی نہیں کر پاتی ہے۔ تو ہمیں امید ہے کہ ہمارے مہمانان خصوصی اور مہمان اعزازی اس پر زیادہ اچھی طرح سے اور تفصیل کے ساتھ انشاءاللہ گفتگو کریں گے اور روشنی ڈالیں گے، اور ہم سب ان سے مستفید ہوں گے۔ میں امید کرتا ہوں کہ انشاءاللہ یہ سیمینار اور یہ منعقد ہونے والا ویبینار کامیابی سے ہمکنار ہوگا اور ہمارے لیے اور سب کے لیے مفید ثابت ہوگا۔ ایک مرتبہ پھر میں آخر میں اس پروگرام میں تہہ دل سے آپ سب کا استقبال کرتا ہوں، ویلکم کرتا ہوں، اور انہی الفاظ پر اپنی بات کو ختم کرتا ہوں۔ خدا حافظ، شکریہ۔
بہت بہت شکریہ سر۔ I would now like to request our patron and principal, Professor Aftab Anwar Sheikh, sir, to please deliver the presidential address for this International Web Symposium.
Thank you very much, sir. A very pleasant good morning to one and all. I take this opportunity to welcome the dignitaries present today for the International Web Symposium on Abul Kalam Azad, his life and thought. Friends, with COVID-19 spreading rapidly around the globe, policymakers are worried about how to fight the virus and minimize its impact on the economy. There are no easy answers. But Department of History has taken pains to organize this web symposium, International Web Symposium today as online meeting. Friends, in India on November 11th, National Education Day is celebrated to commemorate the birth anniversary of India's first Vice President, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was a scholar and independent activist and popularly known as Maulana Azad. During his tenure, he was one of the senior leaders of Indian National Congress who established a national education system. Therefore, his primary focus was on providing free primary education. In 1992, he was awarded Bharat Ratna, nation's highest civilian honor, for his contribution as an educationist and a freedom fighter. The important thing about Dr. Azad, Maulana Azad, his contribution was remarkable in building up the Indian Institute of Technology and in the foundation of University Grant Commission in India, an institution to supervise and advance learning higher education across the country. Maulana Azad was firmly believed that primary education should be conveyed in the mother tongue, what we are realizing today in the new and national education policy. In 1949, he focused on the importance of imparting information in modern sciences. He was a freedom fighter and started a weekly magazine in Urdu called Al Hilal to criticize the British government. Definitely, today's web symposium and both the speakers we have today, I welcome both of them. I congratulate the economics department. I congratulate the Department of History, the HOD, Dr. Zoeb, and all those who have taken pains to organize this event successfully. I welcome our Vice Principal, Professor Moinuddin Khan, and all the dignitaries present here. I wish you all every success in achieving your desired aim to attendance at this International Web Symposium. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your encouragement and kind words. It's always an honor to hear good words and words of wisdom from you. You are always there to guide us. As all of you are aware that November 11 happens to be the birth anniversary of Abul Kalam Azad and also celebrated as National Education Day. Now, most of us who are present, who are students of history and political science, and in general also, know that Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was a very eminent nationalist leader, a freedom fighter, and education minister of first education minister of independent India. But there's more to his personality than these things, and those things are not known to us. It is primarily with this objective that we have organized this seminar to reflect and dwell upon his thought and his life, how he visualized India, and of course his other contributions to the field of Urdu literature, to prose, to religion is also immense. Keeping this in mind, we had this thing in our mind that we will be doing symposium. Our principal said that you go for international web symposium. So we thought that we should reflect more on Azad's thought and what a intellectual and dynamic man he was. And with this aim, we decided to have with us Ms. Shauna Rodriguez, who is our keynote speaker from University of Columbia, New York. She has extensively worked on Azad and Ambedkar. She is an alumnus of St. Stephen's College, New Delhi. Then she had her MA and MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And now she is enrolled in PhD program at Columbia University. She is also the South Asia editor of Borderlines, a blog associated with the journal Comparative Studies of South Asia, Africa, and Middle East. It's an honor to have you, Shauna, with us in this symposium. I guess you can tell us, and I'm hopeful that all of us will benefit a lot and will gain new insights from your views, which you will reflect, you will throw on Abul Kalam Azad. My next and guest speaker is Dr. Sayyid Tehseen Raza. He has been a close friend for many years. He is assistant professor in Department of Security and Strategic Studies in Aligarh Muslim University. Tehseen uh, has also been a visiting fellow at University of Oslo, Norway, and Freiburg in Austria. He caters to especially international studies, security issues, and recently he had his book published from Routledge entitled Pakistan and United States in 21st Century Geostrategy and Geopolitics. Now, this book has also been reviewed by World Geostrategic Insights. Thank you, Tehseen, for accepting my invite to be the guest speaker for today's program on Abul Kalam Azad. Now, without taking much time of you and without let you waiting all, I would now like to request Shauna to please start with your talk on Abul Kalam Azad. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Hassan, and thank you to everyone at the Pune College of Arts, Science and Commerce for having me present today. And I feel so happy to be able to speak on November 11th. It's a special day, especially because it's National Education Day in India, and because we get to commemorate someone who is a great thinker of India, but not acknowledged as one enough. I have a paper, and I'm going to read it. The paper is called The Pluralism of Place. And let me start with a quote by Abul Kalam Azad. It is from his essay, Islam and Nationalism, which he published in the Al-Hilal in 1927. Open quotes. It is strange that during the period, which was one of utmost involvement with the Islamic affairs outside the country, that is the Khilafat movement, nobody ever questioned, from the point of view of Indian nationalism, the validity of taking so much interest in Islamic affairs, or considered that the so-called pan-Islamism and Indian nationalism were in contradiction with each other and could not be combined. Indeed, even at that time, one group was opposed to the Khilafat movement, but that group included both Hindus and Muslims. Besides, that opposition was not based on the fact that the affairs concerned an area beyond the geographical boundaries of India. It was due to their unwillingness to go as far as the movement intended to go. Close quotes. So I picked up this quote, and the topic of today's conversation Sorry, have I been muted this whole while?
No, last 2
You are
seconds.
unmuted. You are unmuted.
Yeah, you are unmuted.
Okay, great, thanks. So, I picked up this quote from the Al Hilal because we live in a world where nationalism is unquestionable. But in the 1920s, the nation as a political form was not an inevitability. And there were lots of questions on what form of political community should emerge. I call this period from 1920s to the 1950s a critical juncture in Indian politics. I just want to start off with a disclaimer that I'm not a historian. I do political theory, but this is a bit of a history paper. So please bear with me as I go through the argument. Let me start off with my first section, the critical juncture in Indian politics. In early May 1920, Abul Kalam Azad, a prominent leader of the Khilafat movement, which was organizing people and resources across India to support the Ottoman Caliphate and simultaneously preparing to provide a pan-India platform for the non-cooperation movement against colonial rule, was approached by several organizers of the movement. They sought his opinion on the status of India as a place of residence for Muslims, given that it was ruled by a British colonial state that had massacred over 370 in which was, and I quote, from another of Azad's texts, reducing the Khalifa of Islam to a mere shadow in flat defiance of Muslim religious obligations and in flagrant disregard of all solemn pledges given by the British Prime Minister to His Majesty's Indian subjects. They asked him, close quotes, they asked him if these circumstances allowed for Islamic ways of being in India and if they should consider moving elsewhere. In response to this request for an opinion, Azad issued a fatwa. He said, after examining all the reasons embodied in the Sharia, contemporary events, interests of the Muslims, and the expedient counsel, I feel completely satisfied in my perception that for Muslims of India, there is no Sharia alternative but to go on hijrat. However, he went on to state, if there is a presumption about those who stay in India as compared to their hijrat is more desirable for carrying on the struggle against British colonial rule or for proclaiming and commemorating the true kalima, or those who have plausible reasons for not doing hijrat, or there is a delay due to genuine logistical problems experienced in large scale population transfer, such people can undoubtedly stay. The fatwa ends with, it is evident that everyone cannot migrate from India all at once, nor is that required by the Sharia. The process of hijrat will go on, and at the same time, a Muslim community will continue to exist in India. Close quotes. The translation is not mine. The translation is from M. Naeem Qureshi's Pan Islam in British India, the translation of the fatwa. But you can find a copy of the fatwa in case any of you are looking for it I'm sorry, I'm missing the citation here, but I'll come back to it in a few minutes. Now, the reception to his fatwa resulted in the acceleration in the activities of a Hijrat committee in Delhi, a farman from the Afghan Council in India that the Muhajirun would be entitled to the same rights as Afghan nationals and Takawi loans to buy land once they migrated. There was regular reportage from newspapers like the Zamindar on Muslims who were departing from Delhi, Lahore, and Bhopal towards colonial India's northwest borders. And over 40,000 people, these are official figures from the Khilafat Committee, from India arriving in and settling into different localities in Afghanistan. Despite the publicity that the Hijrat gained and the political defiance that it demonstrated to the colonial state's attempts to control the movement of people towards Afghanistan, which was then a sovereign nation state in between two large empires, that's the British and the Ottoman Empire, Mahatma Gandhi requested many of the Khilafat movement's leaders not to leave India and instead dedicate themselves to combining the political energy of the Khilafat movement with the soon to be launched non cooperation movement. Azad, along with the top leadership of the Khilafat movement, heeded to Gandhi's request and remained in India to actively mobilize support across the country for the non cooperation movement. In December 1921, he was arrested in Calcutta because of his involvement in the movement and obvious alliance with Gandhi. During his arrest, Azad wrote one of his primary anti colonial texts, Kaule Faisal. In this text, where he quoted thinkers such as John Stuart Mill and Joseph Mazzini as thinkers to learn from in the fight against tyrannical governments, he also outlined why the Islamic Caliphate should be a center for shaping counter universals to the world constituting forces of modern European empires. Non cooperation against the colonial state, he argued, was not just the outcome of a sense of disbelief in the form of justice enforced by what he called conglomerates of domination, like the colonial bureaucracy and colonial courts, where some of the greatest acts of injustice in world history had taken place. It sounds very familiar to what is happening in India today. And he said, all this is happening in the name of universalism. It was also the outcome of multiple intellectual arguments that shaped the Khilafat movement, the diverse set of anti colonial conferences that were taking place in India at that time, and the multiple engagements that anti-imperial movements outside of India, which he would often talk about in his journal Al-Hilal, were playing in persuading Indian Muslims to have confidence in their faith instead of lamenting their numerical inferiority, that is, their demographic inferiority as minorities, and inviting them to join hands fearlessly with the Hindus. I'm sorry, that was a quote, persuading Indian Muslims to have confidence in their faith. So, close quotes. Kaule Faisal was translated and published in Arabic and Turkish in Cairo and Constantinople, making Azad into a globally read political thinker who was asserting the stakes of Islam and Muslims in a diverse India's future and taking leadership of the intellectual task of popularizing India's movement for self-rule across the vast geographical spread of societies that were considered Islamic across West, Central, and South Asia. When Azad was released from jail, Gandhi nominated him to become the president of the Indian National Congress. Azad was the youngest president of the Indian National Congress at that time. Given that Azad had declared only 2 years earlier that Muslims should migrate from India, this nomination appears surprising on the surface. However, it was not just the outcome of a calculative move on Gandhi's part to put a practicing Muslim at the helm of a growing nationalist Congress, nor was it merely about Azad's continued involvement in the Indian anti-colonial movement alone that secured him this position. Rather, such an acknowledgement of Azad's political and intellectual presence demonstrated an acceptance from thinkers like Gandhi and others like Nehru, etc., Motilal Nehru and Jawahar too, of an imaginary of the political community envisaged by Azad that came from engaging closely with Indian Muslims and non-Muslims' reflections on the place that they belong to. According to Azad, the concept of place lay at the intersection, or at the, not the intersection, the median, I'm translating it as median, of nationalism and the universalism of that Islam put forward. Azad's position on the significance of India as part of quote unquote the Muslim world. This is a problematic term, but I'm going to use it for the lack of a better term at this moment. And by the Muslim world, I refer to, this large world that extended from all the way from the Balkans, to Bengal and beyond on the east, did not merely center on India having the largest population of Muslims in the world. Rather, his political activities, which led him to travel from Bengal to Egypt as a significant actor in an important node in anti-imperial networks labeled as pan-Islamic or revolutionary or non-violent, also resulted in the formation of a substantial body of ideas located primarily in the subcontinent, but which engaged very closely with this larger trans-regional space for the sustenance and future of the Islamic discursive tradition. This space once constituted what Shahab Ahmad, in his magnificent book, What is Islam, calls the vast geographical and demographic swath of societies of Muslim people, which is the Balkans to Bengal complex, where a common paradigm of Islamic life and thought by Muslims and others were imagined and conceptualized and given mutually communicable meaning. While Shahab Ahmad, temporarily delimits this Balkans to Bengal complex between 1350 to 1850, Azad, as someone who did not have a Western modern education, but was trained in the Dars-e-Nizami by a highly articulated set of subjects, programs, books, and institutions that formed, the curriculum of the Dars-e-Nizami and the training that many elite and influential Muslims who were part of this world received at that time, drew on this imaginary of what Shahab Ahmad calls the Balkans, the Bengal complex, to shape a political imaginary for India as well. However, effectively imagining a deeply diverse nation of India as a significant place for Muslims to reside in, despite their demographic constitution in India, you know, being lesser than non-Muslims, and deploying numerically and deploying this vision against the world constituting forces of modern European imperialism involved contending with several concerns that formed what I'm calling a critical juncture in the histories of India and Islam in the 20th century. This critical juncture, extending from 1920 to 1950, was deeply impacted by, but was not the same as, the significant moment of rupture when what has been called the only remaining Muslim imperial power was defeated and dismembered in the aftermath of World War One. I'm referring to the Ottoman Caliphate. Um, Rather, in this paper, I circumscribed this critical juncture as a 3 decade long process in which political and legal imaginaries shifted from the dominance of modern imperial forms of rule to those shaped by the nation state. During this critical juncture, the expansive and mobile worlds of empires were being reforged by gradated demands of non domination, dominion status, self rule, post colonial constitutionalism, and eventually decolonization. It was shaped as much by different forms and networks of anti imperialism and their convergences, such as non-violent anti-colonialism, revolutionary networks influenced by Marxism, and those that we are familiar with, those of economism. And this was transformative, and it transformed political, these networks transformed political imaginaries from imperial forms of rule to those of post-colonial nation states. With the shift brought about by this critical juncture, the question of securing Islamic ways of being in modern India, which had formerly been characterized either by a nostalgia for the past or what Faisal Deji calls a luxurious apologia for the present, and he does this following Fazlur Rahman, or a condition of zillat or humiliation that had that had caused Muslims to rethink their place in India. This is I'm referring to Akbar Zaid's new work on the on Muslims in India. Now shifted to the construction of a political space in localities accessible to Indian Muslims, where they could shape a place of their own without being dominated by European imperialism or by Hindus in India. Those who framed Indian Muslims, what Tanveer Fazal calls a minority conundrum, as a problem with numbers, sought to resolve the question of a political space for Indian Muslims through an abstract idea of Muslim nationalism, and its dominant trajectory results in the creation of Pakistan. However, the demand for this geographically detached, spatially abstract, and Muslim majority invention of a nation was disputed not only through an Indian nationalism that upheld the multi religious composition of the imagined nation, but also by a specific formulation of the large expanse of land that is India as a place that Muslims can choose to live in. And this idea of a place would become a defining problematic to the question of Muslims as the categorical minority in India. Place, however, was a tricky concept to rethink in the 20th century. It took on a range of meanings in pre colonial and early modern Hindustan as home, where home was not just merely geographically rooted in a place of origin, but shaped by the itineraries that shaped the inter Asia circulation of people, ideas, and materials across this Balkans to Bengal complex. Um, it was also thought of as a place of residence with elastic borders. Borders were not central to the imaginary of place before the 1920s, in India at least, or as geographical landscapes, as imagined in the story tradition of the Persianate past. I'm referring here to Manakia's recent work on Persianate selves. It was the shadow of nationalism on conceptions of place which caused all these essential components which formerly existed in it to, if not be entirely obliterated by, but at least be subordinated to a territorial idea of nation and the dichotomies between majority and minorities within this territorially circumscribed idea of the nation. Azad was very deeply sensitive to the shift caused by this critical juncture and used the idea of place repeatedly. In some situations, even test and question, and in other situations, endorse and strengthen the unstable yet hegemonic nationalism that came to replace modern forms of imperial rule and the accompanying dilemmas of the minority in India. Because of the shifting nature of the critical juncture, his conceptions of place shifted as well, demonstrating the pluralism of place in the imaginaries he was negotiating with. Okay, let me come to the next section. I think I've already spoken for quite long. Professor Asen, will you tell me when I need to stop? It's a long paper, so do let me know if I need to stop. Okay, so let me talk about the irrelevance of borders a little. Azad was once glorified in writing on Indian anti-colonialism as India's foremost Muslim nationalist and a thinker of composite nationalism. He was the longest running president of the Indian National Congress before independence from 1940 to 1946. He was the key negotiator in the transfer of power from British colonial rule to an Indian government under constitutional democracy. He was the leading Muslim politician, and there's, I think, no question about this, to oppose Muslim nationalism in favor of Pakistan, and he opposed it on the side of India, as we all know. He was the first Minister of Education in independent India. And Azad has been read and celebrated as the ideal nationalist who placed democratic equality and pluralism ahead of religious separatism, Hindu Muslim unity before freedom from colonial rule, and the social unity of a diverse nation ahead of any other interest. Azad's political activity and intellectual contributions, however, were not limited to India's national movement alone. He was influenced by the redefined idea of pan-Islamism, and I think just quickly to explain this. Pan-Islamism was a term that was introduced originally by French theorists like Ernest Renaud. Um, um, Ernest Renaud introduced the term the Muslim world, and Pan-Islamism was a term used by European thinkers to talk about, to define people who talked about a global Muslim community, often used with very Orientalist connotations in order to, categorize what was a diverse and very vast region into these, small homogenizing terms. Um, but it was subverted by previous generation of itinerant intellectuals like Jamal al-Din Afghani and Sheikh Mohammad Abdu. Azad worked closely with these 20th century pan-Islamists and also with thinkers from India such as Numani and Muhammad Rashid Rida. Rida was not from India, he was from Syria, until the disbanding of the Khilafat movement in 1923 to shape an Islamic anti-imperial agenda from India in the first decades of the 20th century. The concept of place became important to Azad's politics because of a question that kept cropping up among different sections of the Muslim population over the course of British rule in India. Could Muslims consider India to be a place of residence and a place of their own now that it was ruled by a British colonial state that did not accept the centrality of Islamic law and concepts to political and social life? The question was posed as a contention over whether India was Darul Islam or an abode of Islam, or Darul Harb or the abode of unbelievers. This was not a new debate within different traditions of subcontinental Islam. These terms were frequently used in the 18th and 19th century by Islamic scholars to assess India as a place that was now under British rule. Around the time of the issuance of his fatwa, the one that I spoke about at the start of his lecture, in 1920, Azad declared that India could not be considered to be Darul Islam under British rule. Given this, Muslims in India either had to move to a place that could be Darul Islam, or they had to rethink how India could be a place of residence for Muslims given the critical juncture that Indian politics was going through. Far from its common contemporary perception as a perennial war zone, Afghanistan was a center of trade and legal and scholarly exchange between Muslims across Asia. Azad's fatwa did not identify Afghanistan as a site of residence just out of the blue. Rather, it followed on the heels of a complex process of constitution forming in Afghanistan, in which Aman Allah Khan, the king of Afghanistan, had closely consulted with these different interlinkages between Ottoman or Turkish jurists, Afghan clerics, and Indian Muslim bureaucrats. At that time, the Afghan constitution was, at the time at which the Afghan constitution was established, Afghanistan was one of the only sovereign Muslim nations amidst imperial Asia, and because of this was viewed as being on equal status with the war-weary British Empire, at least in international law. Its constitutionalism contested the dominant secular liberal monopoly of the transatlantic world over ideas like the rule of law. And it was driven by a legislative campaign after winning the war, that's World War I, against massive imperial powers and sought to create norms for a modern state of Afghanistan that upheld international norms of legality, which could be justified through the interpretative traditions of Islamic law and ethics. What was sought by Azad when he announced his fatwa was not just a place of residence that would be less disruptive than those under British imperial rule. Rather, it was a place of residence for Muslims where the legal imaginary was shaped by the synthesis of the Sharia and modern tenets of constitutionalism. It was the intersection of inter-Islamic networks and linkages and the investment in Islamic constitutionalism that made placemaking in Afghanistan as a site of collective life for Indian Muslims a viable possibility for Azad, and presumably for the sizable number of Muslims who chose to move from India's lush and fertile and flat plains in the United Provinces to mountainous Afghanistan. Surely this move could not have been an easy one. Um, the success and recognition of the Afghani constitution making process, both across the Muslim world and elsewhere, significantly marked Azad's interest in the possibility of shaping a modern constitution that could both be embedded in and infused with Islamic justifications of a political community later for India. Azad's fatwa also displayed the confidence with which residents of the subcontinent could, in a critical juncture, defy other Indians' demands for loyalty towards Indian soil. These demands, as we know, are only too prominent today in today's India. At the height of pan-Islamism in the 1920s, the territorial Indian nation, especially one that was under British imperial rule, without significant constitutional anchors from nationalist leaders, was less concrete as a viable political formation than Afghanistan. Further, Afghanistan was an important node in the trans-imperial network of the Muslim world that had gained a distinct shape with modern technologies of travel, mass publishing, and anti-imperial political organization. As a peaceful abode where Islamic practices were not constantly under threat, Afghanistan held immense potential as a place where Indian Muslims could migrate to. However, a few months into the Hijrat, there was a lot of pressure from the British government on the King of Afghanistan to force out from his borders those who had migrated from India to this declared abode of peace. I won't go into the details of what happened, but Amanullah Khan didn't necessarily cave in to the British. Afghanistan was doing everything they could to help Indians there, but there was a lot of discussion and discourse on whether people should return to India or not. And eventually, once the non-cooperation movement starts, it becomes more of a viable option many of these people to return to India. And, um, Azad's pan-Islamism also takes a very severe blow with these developments. And as I just started my paper with, I said that he was arrested. He had to go to jail, and there was very little he could do in order to defend his position. Much changed from 1924 to 1932. Drastic global changes began to occur, which affected the contours of the Muslim world very seriously, the Muslim world. The Turkish National Assembly abolished the caliphate, and they replaced it with the Republic of Turkey. The kingdom of the Hijaz in West Arabia, where Mecca and Medina were located, was conquered and brought under the rule of the unified kingdom of Saudi Arabia. With these changes that caused a major shift in the political, social, and economic context in West Asia, many South Asian Muslim scholars and merchants who resided or did business or studied in the cosmopolitan cities of Istanbul and what used to be the Hijaz began to return to India. The changes taking place in West Asia had a profound impact on Azad, as it did on several other influential Muslims in colonial India. Azad's mother was from the Hijaz, and she was an Arab woman, and he had spent the first 10 years of his life there. He increasingly began to rework his involvement with various Arab networks of anti imperialism. It was during this time that the word nation came to be used increasingly by him as the word which could capture the idea of India as an abode in which Muslims could dwell in on their own terms. I'm not saying that he didn't use the word nation before, he did, but he would not use it in a big way to define his ideas. He didn't use it theoretically or intellectually. He often just referred to it, in order to refer to India. But he starts thinking about Indian nationalism after these developments take place in a far more serious way. However, he did not use the term nation uncritically. The term nation and thus nationalism, he argued, relied too heavily on the notion of race, and this ran counter to the spirit of not only universal humanity or insaniyat in Islam that upheld all races as one people, but also that of the entire planet or the entire earth as accessible as something that can be accessible to all of humanity. He uses the term arzi here, and I'm curious to know from someone who probably knows Urdu better than I do whether I'm translating arziyat correctly here. John Willis, the scholar at the University of Boulder, he has argued that while the claim of insaniyat was as a fundamental tenet of Islam was not novel within Islamic thought, Azad's assertion that it was an eternal truth to which believers must bear witness was unique. Azad's emphasis on arziyat was also a very distinctive emphasis. He did not possess an Anthropocene view of the world. Rather, he considered God's providence or rububiyat uh, to have created a world of diverse living things with whom human beings shared their environments. And he makes this argument in his Tarjuma al Quran. In an article titled Islam or Nationalism, published in his journal Al Hilal in 1927, Azad linked his position on the relevance of place to his critical use of the term nation. People, he said, had been arguing that no Muslim should be a nationalist for the reasons that I just listed above. But the large heartedness of Islam did not negate nationalism, nor did nationalism undermine Islamic perceptions of the world. Reality, he said, lies in between. This reality, which lay in between nationalism and Islam, came to be captured by Azad by the concept of place. Man, he argued, develops an affinity for the place where he lives because of the physical conditions of the place and how these physical conditions come to coordinate the course of man's life. These conditions give man continuity and consistency of experience. In the common experience of a place of habitation, all affiliations of race and kinship also merge together. Interestingly, they did not disappear, they merged together. And it was I'm sorry, let me just pull together my, um, I missed my, sorry. All affiliations of race and kinship merged. It was this merging which allowed one to realize the idea of unity of insaniyat and arziyat. This affinity for a place was different from patriotism because patriotism implied allegiance to a state and an entire land or territory associated with that state, rather than an allegiance to one's place of habitat. Thus, nationalism, which relied on notions and of like patriotism and race, was missing out on the wider scope of human relations that an idea of place could lend to a diverse group of people. When I read this argument, I was thoroughly fascinated. I am originally from Mangalore, which is in Karnataka, very close to Pune, and I grew up there. So, this idea that, people, everyone likes to say Mangalore is the greatest place in the world. Mangalore is the greatest place in the world. And Azad helped me understand why. Because, like he says, you develop an affinity to a place, not necessarily to a nation constantly. Further, Azad argued, warned against chauvinism in setting boundaries to a place, making a distinction between chauvinism about a place due to the protection of a nation and chauvinism of a place due to the prejudices of a nation. Azad argued that it was the former that needs to be considered while identifying a place as Darul Islam. To illustrate this point, he argued that Arab chauvinism over their place of dwelling had emerged from Arabs seeking to establish a hierarchy over non Arabs in the Muslim world. This had also caused un Islamic hierarchies in this world. This kind of boundary making came from a jingoistic position which emphasized the prejudices of a nation, according to Azad. Given that the newly formed nation state of no, not nation state, newly formed kingdom of Saudi Arabia was based on such hierarchical formulations, it went, according to Azad, against the spirit of Islam. Over the course of the critical juncture, Azad also directed his criticism against Hindu nationalist ideology, which had systematically been outlined by Veer Savarkar in his 1923 text, The Essentials of Hindutva, which came to be retitled as Hindutva, Who is a Hindu, in 1928. Like Savarkar and other Indian nationalists such as M.K. Gandhi, L. Lajpat Rai, and S.N. Banerjee, Azad had read the Italian thinker Giuseppe Mazzini very closely. While Savarkar read Mazzini as a guide on nationalism, Azad read him as a thinker of the brutality of the modern state and drew on Mazzini's thought when reflecting on the tyranny of power that the colonial state practiced through its apparatus like jails, laws like sedition, and the silent opposition from its subjects. When it came to nationalism in India, Azad's emphasis on decolonization made him very wary of direct translations of European ideas in the Indian context. His critique of Hindu nationalism as stoking the prejudices of a nation also tied in with this. He argued that Europeans had allowed for their collective beliefs in human rights and liberty to now be worded around a new terminology for these beliefs, that of nation and nationalism. But this terminology mobilized and upheld a defense of human rights, non domination, liberty, and equality only for those who were within the boundaries of Europe. Those who were outside Europe, Azad pointed out, were considered inferior nations, possessing no right to hold these collective beliefs. Without a reimagination of this kind of nationalism and the prejudices that it upheld, Indian nationalism would remain inherently unstable amidst the extreme diversity of its emerging polity. In thinking about the nation in this way, Azad demonstrated not only a criticality towards the unthinking application of nationalism in India, but also shaped a powerful argument on the racialized presence of inferior nations within and not on the periphery of the existing international order. His argument on the epistemic domination exerted by European imperial nations with their exclusive retention to the right of collective beliefs of human rights, non-domination, etc., displayed a remarkable similarity to radical thinkers who attempted to reorder the world elsewhere in the wake of the collapse of European empires. So, if you read African political thought, you read the work of Kwame Nkrumah, George Padmore, Julius Nyerere, you will find a lot of similarities between theirs and Azad's arguments. It's a work waiting to be done. So if someone wants to do their PhD on that, I would deeply encourage you to do so. Azad did not reject all ideas, however, that were European. As Sher Ali Tareen has argued, Azad, against opposition from other Muslim critics, built arguments for civic relationships of friendship, what he called muwalat, between Muslims and Hindus on grounds of citizenship and parity. Amar Sohail, who has demonstrated how his conviction in such an idea of parity drove Azad to argue that the Indian nation, or what was being formed as the Indian nation, was constructed in equal measure by both Hindus and Muslims. I too have written elsewhere that Azad's argument on parity led him to argue that it was not just ideas of nationalism that that mutually was constituted by India's diverse traditions, but ideas of constitutionalism as well. मैंने बहुत बात किया है. I've done a lot of speaking in this complex term, so please feel free to ask me questions. And I speak Hindi and I understand Urdu. I also understand Marathi. So, please feel free to ask me questions at any point. Okay. Let me now just come to I'm going to quickly try and summarize because I think I have maybe 5 minutes left. Dr. Hassan, I have 5 minutes left. I'm sorry, you're muted. I can't hear you.
You have 10 minutes more. You can speak.
Okay, cool. So I have 10 minutes more. So let me see how much I can put in. Okay. Now, arguments on the concept of place accompanied most of Azad's idea on citizenship within an Indian polity, where he argued that as long as Hindus did not seek to colonize Muslims or Islamic knowledge systems, and common life was built in smaller localities and places over time, the Indian state could, not Indian state, but Indian citizenship could work through common achievements and joint endeavors between different communities in a place. Usually when we read about Azad, it's all about Azad talking about how Muslims wore the same clothes as Hindus, Hindus celebrated the same festivals as Muslims. All of this is true, of course, but I think Azad was a far deeper thinker than that. He wasn't just pointing or describing common traditions in India, but he did have a very strong idea of how citizenship could be built based on the idea of place. Okay, come to my next section, which is on place-specific duties. By 1930, Muhammad Iqbal, the poet and political thinker, considered to be the father of the his proposal of separate autonomous federal states in the Muslim majority areas of the subcontinent. Iqbal's position was initially to have a federal nation state, not for Pakistan. The idea of Pakistan comes up much later, at least in my reading it definitely. Iqbal had outlined what is the classic boundary problem in political theory for the future Indian democracy by delimiting the people of the democracy according to a 2-decade-old, deeply contested logic of majority and minority, and only slightly older ideas of the consolidated religious identities of Hindu and Muslim communities in India. The idea of forming a nation state with a separate territory was not explicit to his argument at this stage, and the idea of Pakistan was still close to a decade away. What Iqbal did propose was that state legislative assemblies in Muslim majority states shape laws for these states on grounds of ijma or an Islamic consensus. Um, yeah. And over the next decade and a half, this proposal was heatedly debated within Muslim circles, especially in North India, ultimately culminating in the formation of Pakistan. To counter Iqbal's position, Azad weaved together an argument that was not just historical, but stressed a cosmopolitan idea of India that had been a place where different communities repetitively thrived. While Azad acknowledged that there were regular clashes between Muslims and non Muslims in India's past and majoritarian acts of violence against Muslims during his own political life, he didn't see this violence as peculiar to India alone and thus the defining feature of political life. The people of India may not be a complete and stable national body like those of fully formed nations, yet India's history was proof of the repetition of strong forms of political pluralism across different places in India. India was not a land that was home to only one race, but it was home to many races, cultures, and religion, and to which Islam had contributed immensely. And now I quote: This, which is India's vast and hospitable land, welcomed them all and took them into her bosom. We, which is Muslim, had brought our treasures with us to this land, which was rich with its cultural heritage. We handed over our wealth to her, and she unlocked for us the doors of her riches. Close quotes. For Azad, Islamic ideals, like liberal, Marxist, Upanishadic, or Christian ideals, could permeate through different parts of India as it had done through the long history of varying Islamic traditions across diverse places in India and not in Muslim majority areas alone. For a pan Islamist, for whom India was an integral part of the Muslim world, and vice versa. Remember, the Muslim world is an integral part of India too. This is just a fact, it's a simple fact. Azad found Iqbal's delimitations of the Indian polity into Hindu and Islamic ideas alone to be deeply limiting. Azad constantly questioned the territorial definitions that such an imagination of the polity relied on. More importantly, the focus of identity and representation in this framework completely undermined the importance of place, not just as a container of varying cultural identities, but for how it shaped social ecology itself of the Islamic ties to India. After all, Islamic imaginaries of India did not merely manifest themselves in Muslim majority states of North and East India, but had enduringly been sustained in the Western and Southern states, where Muslims were in a minority yet had practiced and participated in collective life, commerce, and politics. As I didn't need to be told that the oldest mosques in India were actually on the west coast. They were not in North India or in Calcutta. Further, the networks that different Muslims in India had with the rest of the world, both through land and through the ocean, and by the ocean I mean seas as well, the Arabian Sea, etc. These were not just religious or political ties, but also those of trade, finance, and education, and had fostered distinct patterns of affiliations, adherence to different juridical schools, varied everyday practices of Islam, vastly different languages and scripts, and different imaginaries of place based on oceans, plains, mountains, rivers, through which Islamic life proceeded. Creating legislative institutions to delimit Muslims from non Muslims would limit the possibilities for political communities emerging from this rich and diverse history of placemaking of Islam in India and its associated history of world making by Indian Muslims. In setting the importance of place in this way, Azad had marked out the close ties that adherents of India had developed with the place that is India over, 1300 years. These ties were not just social ties. While he was sensitive to the kind of interaction that had occurred amongst diverse people to build a common language, manners, customs, etc., Azad did not assume that these would lead to doctrinal or ideological concurrence. Rather, he attributed a normative quality to the physical presence in the place that is India, which gained deep popularity amongst a large number of Muslims. Physical presence in this place allowed adherents of Islam to make a claim to India as much as any other worldview prevalent in the region. I'm going to quote from his Ramgarh presidential address. Islam now has, and this the translation is Jawaharlal Nehru's. It's a common misconception that Nehru wrote this speech. You know, it's enough of proof to say that Azad wrote this speech in Urdu, and Nehru is the one who translated it into English. Azad even writes this letter to Nehru saying that, you know, the translation is so beautiful, etc. Okay, let me quote. Islam has now as valid a claim on this land as Hinduism. If Hinduism has been the religion of its people for several thousand years, Islam too has been its religion for 1,000 years. Just as Hindus can say with legitimate pride that he is an Indian and a follower of Islam, so too can a Muslim proudly claim to be an Indian and a follower of Islam. An Indian Christian or the follower of any other religion can also similarly claim with legitimate pride that he is an Indian following one of her many religions. Close quotes. Okay, so let me come to the conclusion now. Many of Azad's arguments on place were a strong theme in his early writings, particularly in his newspapers Al Hilal, Al Balag, and came to develop over time into theoretical ideas through his political praxis. The constant emphasis in his writings and speeches was on ensuring the non-domination of imperial modes of political thought. The trust of his political discourse was on being able to justify to the relational self built by interacting in interaction in context of non-domination, why one could politically associate with, be hospitable to, and socially cooperate with conceptual, religious, and political languages that were different from one's own. The shared outcomes and obligations of diverse people who resided together in a place became one of his foremost and enduring and innovative conceptual tools to question both Hindu majoritarianism in India, who did not leave room for Islamic justifications of the political in India, as well as for Indian Muslims who demanded a separate political establishment for themselves in Pakistan. It was also the concept of place which became the foundation on which Azad began to establish his arguments for constitutional forms of minority rights in India. In his 1940 presidential address to the Congress at Rampur, Azad used the argument that India as a place had enabled a transformative relationship between what was now commonly called the Muslim minority and the Hindu majority. This relationship was shaped by a place being a repository of value for the people who resided in it. Okay, let me end. I have a long paragraph, but I don't want to read it. So I'm I'm going to end now, and I'm just 6 minutes over time. So I'm happy that I didn't go too much over time. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to read this paper.
Thank you, Shauna. It's pleasure hearing to you at length and breadth about Azad. We were in fact not knowing many of the things which you just now told us. So, because you are working on Azad, and so that's why. Anyway, I would just like to say that we will have a question answer session also after our second guest speaker has spoken. So the participants can take questions from any of them if they want to. Uh, I would also like to say, admin, please share the link for feedback form also, so that those who have joined, they can also obtain their certificates. It's necessary to fill the feedback form in order to obtain your certificates. So,
Yes, sir. I have shared the form.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would now like to invite Dr. Sayyid Tehseen Raza to Department of Security International Strategic Studies, Aligarh Muslim University, to please throw some reflections and reflect on how he views Azad and what has been his contribution. Dr. Sayyid Tehseen Raza.
So you're muted. Can't hear you.
Sir, mute yourself. Tehseen Raza sir. Please mute yourself.
Oh, sorry for this initial hiccup. Thank you, Dr. Zuhaib, and thank you, Shauna, and the principal of the college, and all those people who are behind the organization of this international webinar. Particularly I'm thankful to Dr. Zuhaib Hassan and also to Shauna because uh, uh, she's working on Maulana Azad, and she's kind enough to us of the things which are generally not in the public domain in the manner it should have ideally been, about a person who has done so much for India, who was involved in the freedom struggle right from the very beginning, and who actually was, in a sense, single-handedly responsible for one of the important, I can say, important element of the freedom struggle in terms of accommodating the ideas of religiosity, which were quite opposed to the prevailing norms of that time, through his growth in Islamic theology, through his persona, through his aura, and he was not in a sense, in the worldly sense of the term, successful, but if we account him, if we try to understand him in terms of historical processes, so yes, he was quite successful. So before formally beginning my discussion, a brief talk, to be honest, I'm a bit it's quite a bit unsettling for me to focus on the area which I should have spoken on Azad, because after listening to such an important talk, by academic talk, I will rather say, by Shauna Roderick, it is a bit difficult for me to focus on the area. And it generally so happens that whenever you are in such sort of a dilemma, your academic backgrounds help you. You take recourse in the training which you have gone through, and taking cue from this, I also can't resist this temptation of taking recourse in academic backgrounding of mine, and therefore I will take rescue in my academic discipline of political science and international relations. And therefore, I will try to contextualize Azad in terms of an important concept of international relations and security studies, and that is the concept of securitization. And more so because the manner in which Azad has been presented to the Indian populace post independence of the country, the manner in which he is either eulogized or criticized in very extreme terms, and the manner in which, particularly after 2010, you can say, or after 2000, the manner in which the Indian polity has shifted, that actually points out a very important thing which remains amiss from most of the discourses on freedom fighters like Maulana Azad. Only yesterday we had an electoral outcome, you all know, and if Azad would have been alive, he would be anything but happy with the outcome of the result which came only yesterday, or late night, I should say, today only. So my grounding in political science tells me to contextualize things in terms of questioning of the existing facts. So my brief talk of this 25-30 minutes will actually be, in a sense, answer to the question, is Azad relevant? Or if Azad is relevant, or Azad's ideas are relevant, how far those ideas are relevant in the India of today, in the India of 2020. So, not just in India, particularly the ideas for which Azad stood, the ideas which Azad espoused, the ideas which which remained with Azad throughout his life, whether those ideas are relevant not just in our country, but the relevance of those ideas needs to be understood and contextualized, particularly at a time when not just in our country, India, but all over the world, there is this sway of populist leaders from the Western countries to America to the countries in Latin America and at other places. So at such a time, and more so in the Middle Eastern countries, the manner in which Islam, with which Azad is associated with, and we talk highly of Azad's creative interpretation of religion and Azad's reconciling the ideas of nationalism and other thing in terms of Quranic verses. And we see in many parts of the world, particularly in the Middle Eastern region, the manner in which the religion is portrayed, or the Islam is taken in the manner which is not just quite diametrically opposite to the ideas which Azad stood for, or Azad spent his life on. Rather, that is, if you can say, in a sense, almost negate the very existence of the philosophy of Azad. So the moot question in front of us is, if at all Azad is relevant, why is it that he has become irrelevant, or his ideas have become irrelevant? So these things will be very quickly discussed in this brief 13-14 minutes. And because both in terms of Azad's political ideas, in terms of Azad's religious ideas, both are at a historic low in terms of their relevance. Azad's political ideas in terms of the composite nationalism, the secular nationalism, you can say, his ideas of progressive politics, democracy, secularism, these are all-time low. The relevance of these have become all-time low. And his religious ideas in terms of inclusivity of Islam, in terms of rationality, rational interpretation of the verses, all these things have actually now been at an all-time low. So what I'm going to do now is to not just take Azad, because today is Azad's birthday, and it is customary to recall our freedom fighters or those who have done something for your country on their birthday customarily. So it is not going to be a customary remembrance of Azad, but the remembrance of Azad, which will actually be acting as some sort of panacea for the ills which is prevalent in the country of us today and in the world of us today. So what I'm going to do is to have a cursory look on the ideas of Azad, the basic ideas of Azad, and then I will try to discuss the situation in which Azad espoused those ideas, the contextual setting. And then very quickly, I will contextualize the existing importance of his ideas in the current milieu. And before I formally come to my argument, my thesis, I'll just put two quick caveats. The first one is, number one is, Azad, because of India's freedom struggle, because of the nature of India's freedom struggle and the creation of Pakistan, has been put to different gaze and security by the historians and the scholars. Because if we see Azad from Indian historiographical point of view, then Azad is taken quite differently than the manner in which he is taken by scholars from Pakistan. And so from being discussed as India's Maulana, a totem of secularism, a man of luminous intelligence, one of finest product of Islamic culture, and a messiah of Hindu-Muslim unity, an emissary of compassion, as by one group of people on the one hand, to being depicted as I quote, a Muslim shoe-boy of Congress and a person who ditched his own community. Who is the real Azad becomes an enigma for us to understand. And this is actually so because uh, the history has been very selectively and have been peddled very selectively and out of context by some issues, by highlighting some issues. Like, for example, there are many a criticism of Azad related to his taking umbrage at Gandhi calling uh, Jinnah as Qaid-e-Azam. So Jinnah called, it is just an passing reference, or for that matter, for the manner of mediation or something else, as a political tool, maybe I will say. Mahatma Gandhi would use the term Qaid-e-Azam for Jinnah. And the scholars of Pakistan says that, see, what was this man? We call this man to be such a great man, such a compassionate man, talking so highly of things and taking umbrage at one of the person being called as Qaid-e-Azam and not him being called as Qaid-e-Azam. So, but these are actually the selective out of context peddling of historical facts. But this is a fact. Yes, this was a fact, but this is an out of context fact to malign the image of Maulana Azad. And we have also not done anything good on the side of India to extricate our Maulana Azad from such barbs put towards by the scholars inimical to the interest of the composite nationalism of India. And as such, my take would be devoid of both the holistic image of Maulana Azad as well as the disdainful portrayal of him. And the second important caveat of this, of my formal presentation will be that Azad has had his ideas on a lot many important issues, and in order to cover most of those issues, I will not be very exhaustive. I will just be touching off those important issues. So now, formally coming to the things, my thesis is my main argument is that the most important thing for which Azad, am I audible? I can see. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So the thesis of my piece is that the urgent importance and the relevance of Azad's ideas for someone like us living in 2020 of India lie in the fact that Azad did not allow, or I should better reframe it, Azad to the extent possible prevented the political ideas, political issues to be transformed into issues securitized. Or in other words, because transforming political issues of the time into issues securitized was actually supporting the or was suiting the interest of the colonial power at that time. This is the most important aspect of Azad's thought, which I think needs to be emphasized in the India of 2020 or the world of 2020. Yes, this is a fact that there existed problematics between Hindus and Muslims. There existed a conflict between Hindus and Muslims. There is no denying the fact. And there is also this existence of the acrimony. There is the existence of the problem between Hindus and Muslims. But all those were social, cultural, political issues which should have been solved likewise by consultation, by talk, by give and take, by conciliation, by mediation, and by giving time. So there was no urgency to do the things. So the manner in which a political issue, a socio-cultural issue, we can say, that has been securitized is the most problematic thing, which finally ended up in the partition of the country. That was one issue where Azad played a very important role in, to the extent possible, not allowing the issue to gain the urgency, which finally led to the outcome, which is all in front of the eyes. And historians have debated whether that was necessary or not necessary, or what were the historical forces that were responsible. So those issues never warranted securitized solution. And I'm using this securitization here, connoting Ole Weber's concept of securitization, whereby the otherwise simple political, social, cultural issues are transformed into matters of security, which enables extraordinary measures to be used in the name of security. And it makes the issue transform into an existential crisis, thus warranting extraordinary measures to be followed. So in simple words, if I can say, where a surgeon's scalpel was needed, where the things would have been easily done by a surgeon's scalpel, deliberately a butcher's knife was used. A butcher's knife was shoved to do the act. So this actually is the context in which we need to understand the contribution of Maulana Azad. And Azad was intelligent and visionary enough to understand the fatality, the problem of putting religion into the dynamics of the state. And therefore, in his presidential address of International Congress, which I think Shauna also made reference to in 1923, he specifically mentioned, and let me quote him in his own words, the manner in which he presciently told the future of the ongoing India, because religiosity was put into the question of nation. See what, and the most important thing in front of Azad was the unity, the Hindu-Muslim unity, for if I can say it in that sense. But this this ideally is the existence of an idea in which the existence of all other people were very much there. So in this presidential address, he says emphatically, I quote, underquote, this, that is Hindu-Muslim unity, is the first foundation of our national construction, without which not only Indian freedom, but also all those things which are necessary for living and progressing of a country are mere dream and empty thought. Not only that we cannot get freedom without it, but without it, we cannot even create elementary principles of humanity within us. There is some voices coming. Is it okay? I can see you, but I cannot hear you.
Yeah, sir, it's okay. Okay.
Okay. So maybe Zohaib, Mr. Zohaib can do by waving after 5-4 minutes, so that I am able to understand that you people are there and you are listening. Otherwise, generally in classes also it happens sometimes that I keep saying and then my students deliberately go away. Here there is no student, but still. So can you please wave your hand after 3-4 minutes each, 3-4 minutes, so that it can be ensured that you are here. Okay, thank you. So I was emphasizing that element of Azad's thought which gave precedence to the maintenance of unity within the country. And if that should have come at the cost of the independence, he was ready to barter independence in favor of maintaining the unity and integrity. And therefore, he goes on to say, in that very address, presidential address of 1923, he goes on to say, if an angel descends from high on today and declares from the top of Qutub Minar that Swaraj can be got within 24 hours, if only India gives up Hindu-Muslim unity, I would rather give up Swaraj rather than this, that is Hindu-Muslim unity, because, and this is very important, because if there is delay in getting Swaraj, it would be India's loss. But if we lose unity, it will be whole of humanity's loss. And the repercussion of this we are seeing in the world of today. In America, we just saw, and in our country we are seeing this, that if we get Swaraj, it would be, if we lose Swaraj, it would be the India's loss. But if we lose unity, it would be whole of humanity's loss. So this was Azad, who was saying these things in as early a time as 1923. Okay, so this is how a person like Azad's ideas has not been taken into properly taken into consideration by the post-independent India. And another very important thing about Azad is that Azad stood firm on his thoughts, stood firm on his ground. He never wavered, he never vacillated, and to the extent possible, he played his part wholeheartedly. A very important and critically significant aspect of Azad's contribution is the plural and inclusive character of India, was his use of his own background in Islamic theology for this cause. And this I will put under the term of creative theology, the use of creative theology by Maulana Azad, which has been dealt at length by scholars like Asghar Ali Engineer. So Asghar Ali Engineer says that Azad was very to the point in utilizing the resources available in the Quranic text by making use of creative theology to reconcile with the existing ideas of the time. And we may do well to recall the context in which Azad was espousing his ideas. See, that was actually the time, the period when the seeds of decolonization was gaining ground, and there was the emergence of the newly formed Muslim nations, newly formed Muslim nations with Muslim majority. And the Islamic discourse till then was beset with the competing discourse of Watan, that is home, and Mulk, that is country. And there was a fierce debate going on among the Muslims between ideas such as the territorial notion of the nation state and the transnational and the international appeal of the Ummah. And there was this fierce debate going on between, what we can say as the 7th century idea of Ummah, espoused by Islam, and the 17th century idea of nationalism. And the idea of nationalism was the dominant currency of that time. So Azad not just sanitized nationalism, I will say, and I'll just quote him for this, and the manner in which nationalism is used these days from our country to other countries of the world. So Azad did not just sanitize the concept of nationalism, but through his creative use of theology, made it to be something in consonance with the Islamic principles. So Azad, through his creative use of theology, provided the religious conciliation, the religious justification of the idea of nationalism, democracy, and Islam. And as against the Muslim nationalism of the League, as proposed by Jinnah and Iqbal and others, he provided religious justification for composite nationalism, which fell under the banner of Indian secular nationalism. And here I think it is important for us, because the partition debate will obviously come and has come. Therefore, it is important for me to highlight very quickly that, see, at that time, there was 3 strands of thought related to Islam, Muslim, and partition, and a separate homeland. And the problem with the post-partition scholars, or the scholars of partition era, is that they just take this in terms of binary, that there was this one group of Muslim people who were supporting the separate homeland in the existence of Pakistan as a separate state, and there were others who were not opposing. There was this third strand of thought too, and that actually opposed the concept of nationalism itself. So the manner in which the opposition of the existence of Pakistan was done by people like Maulana Maududi, that was on the basis of irreconcilability of the concept of Islam and nationalism. And they were actually against any sort of nationalism, be it Muslim nationalism too. So the manner in which Maududi opposed Pakistan and the manner in which Azad opposed Pakistan is entirely different, because Maududi's conception of in Maududi's view, there was this inherent irreconcilability or the difference between Islamic principle and the principle of nationalism. And credit goes to Maulana Azad that he very creatively made use of the Islamic text, the Quranic verses, to support the idea of reconciling the concept of nationalism in Islam. And another very important thing, which is not spoken much, is the manner in which Azad further carried on this message of his reconciliation to another very important idea, and which is very important these days. And this is the idea of sexual equality, equality between men and women. So generally, traditionally, and nowadays too, Muslims are considered, or Islam is generally considered to be anti-women, or not taking care of the needs of women, or a very regressive attitude towards women. So Azad not just utilized his principles, utilized his Islamic knowledge to propel the idea of placing nationalism in accordance, or justified the idea of nationalism through Quranic verses. He also utilized his Islamic knowledge in order to further the idea that there exists fundamentally equality between women and men too, and he made use of different verses, which I'll come now. So this creative theology of Azad, I will explain in two aspects. The one is in terms of nationalism, and the other in terms of Azad's view on the sexual equality between women and men. Both are very critically important issue, and both these issue needs to in the manner in which it is required nowadays by not just Muslims, but all the people. And that is where we find the relevance of Azad. So why Azad, the question which I initially put, the answer to this is these, apart from others, these two important things. So now coming to the verses which he used in order to present the view that the idea of nationalism is actually not totally against the principle of Islam. Azad came out with his Tarjamanul Quran, meaning by the explanation of the verses of Quran. Zohaib, if I may ask you, how much time I have got now? You can just say me like this.
You have 5 to 6 minutes. You can.
Okay, so very quickly, trying to summarize the thing. For Azad, in terms of reconciling the idea of nationalism, he made a brilliant explanation of Surah Fatiha. Surah Fatiha is actually the beginning of the Quran, and it is the opening chapter of Quran, and in that sense, it's considered to be one of the most significant chapters. And all basic concept is generally considered to be derived from this surah. And there is it is sometimes said that if the whole Quran would not have been revealed and only Surah Fatiha had come, then it would have sufficed. So keeping in view, he came up with this idea of Wahdat-e Adyan. Wahdat-e Adyan meaning by the unity of religion. So in keeping with his philosophy of Wahdat-e Adyan, he emphasized the concept of Rabbul Alameen. I will not go into the detail. There is this verse, Alhamdulillah Rabbul Alameen. So Rabbul Alameen meaning by, he emphasized it that this Rabbul Alameen is not just that God is the creator of human being, Muslims only. Rather, God is the creator of humanity, and not just humanity. God is the creator of the universe, and not just the creator. God is actually, Allah is actually the nourisher of the universe. So by bringing this idea of rububiyat and this idea of nourishment, he very intelligently espoused the idea or explained the idea of unity of all religions. And to just want to quote, I want to very quickly come here with, in order to visualize God as Rabbul Alameen, or the Rabb of all creation, is to conceive of him, meaning God, as not only the creator of everything in the universe, but its nourisher and sustainer as well. The provision that he has made for the sustenance and growth of everything is made under a plan so marvelous that every being is furnished with all that its particular nature demands for its existence, and at the same time it is furnished in a manner that takes cognizance of every changing situation and need. And this is very important. It takes cognizance of every changing situation and need. So the changing situation demands something. There is this allowance by the religion to go in for that, and there is no strict rigidity. There is no strictness in the real sense of the term. And there are some other important thing which I very quickly will bring in. And this concept of rububiyat of Azad includes the quality of which is nothing but world of activity propelled by rububiyat of God. And not because I've not got much time, so I will not delve much into this. And now I'll come to the second important aspect, and that is the Azad's creative theology to embrace the domain of sexual equality, as well as the question of women right, which is in public gaze now, and particularly related to Muslim and Islam. It is much more recently. Last year there was this debate about uniform civil code and gender justice for women and triple talaq and all these things in India too. So in that sense, Azad had realized the importance of the concept of sexual equality, and he said that actually, why is it that the Muslim women are considered to be subservient to men generally? Sorry. Actually, according to Azad, the medieval theologian, give me a second. Azad gives a reason for this, and Azad says that the medieval theologians, on account of their own situation, had so interpreted the Quran that women became subordinate to men, and several restrictions were put on women, which are very much part of the Islamic world today, which didn't have religious sanction. But because of the prevailing situation of that time, the socio-economic condition of the then prevailing time, it is because of that those things become a part of the Islamic, and that needs to be recounted. However, Azad's creative theology struck a new direction. He became champion of sexual equality and had no difficulty in finding support from the Holy Book for this. And he quoted verses which were either ignored or much differently interpreted by the other theologians. And particularly this verse of Quran he made use of. Under bracket it is, the meaning of that is, and women have rights similar to those against them in a just manner. Translated in Arabic, it is lahunna mislul lazi alayna. So Azad says that for Maulana, this is no ordinary verse. Rather, it refers to referring just to the just treatment of women. For him, this verse is actually a sort of a social revolution, a sort for a plea for radical equality for women. And Quran, by pronouncing lahunna mislul ladhi alayna, had made greatest revolution of social life. And these four words gave women all that was her right, but was never given to her. And these words lifted women from, I'm quoting him, lifted women from the dust of deprivation and harshness and seated her on the throne of dignity and equality. And according to him, these four words of Quran were harbinger of equality of women and men. So in this manner of creative use of theology, Azad was successful in not just debunking something which has got so much enmeshed with the idea of Islam that to do away with was actually was seemingly not possible. And Azad, because of his own religious background, because of his scholarship, religious scholarship, because of his grounding in Islamic theology, he was able to dispel these in the manner in which it needed to be. And the problem with the later scholar was that we were somehow unable to carry with those ideas of Azad. I will now, what I'll try to do is, in order to show his relevance, I'm a student of international politics and security. So that way, I've now got less time. So to make the best use of time, what I will use is not just say my words, but actually I will quote verbatim Maulana Azad, two, three, four of his lectures. One related to sedition, which is important, and that because of that, it is Azad has once again become very relevant, and one related to some other important aspect which is now relevant. So now coming to these this very thing, that is Azad's idea related to the equality of women and men. He says that there is this verse where it is written in the Quran that men are actually the maintainers of women. So in order to explain that, Azad says that men are maintainers of women with what Allah has made some of them to excel others, and with what they spend out of their wealth. So Maulana interprets this in this manner, and he says that he is of the opinion that man has been declared as qawwam. That is the word which is written in Quran. Man has been declared the qawwam, or maintainer or protector of women, not because of any inherent sexual superiority, but because in those times the social structure was such that he was the bread earner, and the then social structure did not permit women to earn. Thus the superiority of women over men was a sociological and not a theological matter. And he says, I'll quote him, unquote, "It is obvious that this distinction does not give any superiority by birth to man. It is only a particular system of family life which has given this social status to him. Suppose the family system of civilized people becomes such that the economic system comes to be dominated by women, then this distinction would be of hers, not of men." And this is what Azad is writing in 1920s and 30s, I think. And nowadays, we are in 2020, and we cannot imagine, if you say this to someone that Azad is writing this, a persona of Azad, Maulana with beard, Sherwani, and the Turkish topi, and then you say that these was the thing which Azad was writing in 1920s. So many people will not be able to find that it is what he would have said. Very quickly, another important thing related to, because our country has just been through the throes of sedition sedition law appropriated to a lot many people. So what was the take of Maulana Azad, which was actually appreciated by the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi too. So in his written statement to the magistrate is called in Urdu as Qawle Faisal. Qawl means what we say, and Faisal means that is which cannot be obliterated. Azad says in relation to this sedition thing, I quote him. I have been, I must say that he was charged with this sedition thing. And he says he writes in a written statement to the magistrate, under quote, "I have been charged with sedition, but allow me please to understand the meaning of sedition. Is sedition a name for freedom struggle which is not successful? If that be so, I would fully agree with it. At the same time, however, I would remind you that its name is also the highly respected patriotism once the movement becomes successful." And then he quotes Prophet Muhammad as saying, "If you see a wrong being done," and this is very important for the Muslims now, if you see, and he's saying this to the magistrate, he has written this to the magistrate in a written statement. "If you see a wrong being done, prevent and redress it with your hands. If you cannot do that, speak up against it. If you cannot do even that, tell yourself it is wrong, but that is a weaker form of faith, your iman." So this is what the idea of Azad was. And Azad also said that, "I will feel neither aggrieved nor sad. I am concerned with the entire machinery, not with the individual part. I know that unless the machinery is changed, the parts cannot change against their task. The historian is waiting for us, and the future has been waiting for us. allow us to come here often, and you may also continue to write your judgment. This will go on for days till the doors of another court are flung open. It will be the court of the law of God. Time will be its judge and will write its judgment, and its verdict will be final. So another very important element of Azad's idea was his idea of hope, was his idea of optimism, and with his idea of carrying on. Because if see, we cannot be, but suppose, for example, if persons like us would have been at Azad's place, so either we would have left politics, we would have gone into oblivion, or we would have not done anything. Because after doing so much thing at the end, from worldly standards, he was not successful. He could not prevent the partition to happen. He could not, and his frustration was very much visible in his speech when he met to the people who were going, and he made that speech from the ramparts of the Jama Masjid of Delhi. So his frustration could be very well understood. But here was the man who still didn't lose hope. And while he was the education minister of India, he was instrumental in giving proper shape to the future educational development of the country. And it goes to the credit of Azad that we have many robust institutions of higher learnings now. And I am now trying to move towards the finalization of the thing. And when we are talking about the element of institution building character of Azad, I would like to especially quote his speech, a paragraph of his speech, which he delivered at the time of the establishment of Sahitya Academy. See, even a person like Jawaharlal Nehru was opposed to the idea of existence of the Sahitya Academy because bred in the Western education, he was not aware of the fact that in India things stand differently, and it would be difficult for the Indian scholars to do the things which, for that matter, scholars of other countries easily do. So Jawaharlal Nehru was of the view that there should not be any establishment of such institutions like with the support of the government. But Azad prevailed upon Nehru, and Azad told Nehru that we need the existence of an establishment of such institution because India and Indians were in a very nascent stage and they need institutional support. So despite the sharp difference of opinion whether the government should establish such academies at all, Jawaharlal Nehru himself opposed the idea, and he felt it would be considered an imposition from above. But Azad was able to convince Nehru that there was no alternative to governments taking the initiative in the matter. And when the academy was established, this was his prophetic words. See what he's saying. I quote, "What do we mean by an academy? Is it a school? The answer is no. Is it a research institute? Again, the answer is no. Is it then an association of writers and authors? Still, the answer is in the negative. If, however, it be asked whether it possesses the attributes of all of them, the answer must be an emphatic yes. By calling it an academy, we refer to all these facets and signify that it is at the same time a school, an institute, and an association. If we were to call it a school or an institute or an association only, the full significance of what we intend would remain unexpressed. An academy is in fact something more than any or all of them." Similar was his views in terms of the autonomy of the university. So in terms of the autonomy of the university, in one of his speeches, he was saying that, very quickly I can see the impatience on Zuhaib Bhai's face. I'll just be finalizing. Just give me 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes, because these are the things which needs to be remembered now. And what Azad said in terms of the idea of university, the autonomy of the university. See what he's saying in one of his speeches. He's saying that, under quote, "I would suggest for your consideration the work of the university, which of late has been emphasized by the various NAC committees also, in order for the university to go beyond the academics and to do the things which is required of them." He's suggesting that I would suggest for your consideration that each university might undertake a project by which a selected rural area is adopted by the university, and the university undertakes the responsibility of carrying out developmental programs, educational as well as material within that area. These are the things which is saying in 1950s, and the relevance and the importance of this has been utilized by University of Harvard and Cambridge, and maybe Roderick's University, but not our university. Maybe Zoeb Bhai's university too, but not my university, unfortunately. Sorry. Another very important thing which he says pertaining to the autonomy of the university, till what time autonomy is required, why autonomy is required, or why autonomy is not required. I'm quoting him verbatim. He says, I would also like you to consider carefully, suggesting to the vice chancellors and the stakeholders of the university, I would also like you to consider carefully what exactly we mean by university autonomy. As I have said before, I am against any undue interference by the government or any other body with the internal affairs of the universities. But with a caveat, at the same time, I would like to say categorically that university autonomy is not an end in itself. It's not an end in itself, but a means to an end. So university autonomy is not an end in itself. Well, people of Delhi University and our university might realize painfully, it is actually a means to an end, and that end is the achievement of satisfactory academic standards and the maintenance of the high dignity of the universities as seats of learning and culture. So this is Azad saying this in, I think, 1950. And lest I be scolded by Zoeb Bhai, I will just finish by this last quote, and that is very relevant, but very important, related to the existence of narrow-mindedness, which has engulfed everyone. So even in a country like United States of America, lest I be charged with being biased. Even in a country like Shauna, in a country like USA, where Shauna currently lives, a person like Trump gets such tremendous support, even after 4 years of his, I can take this liberty of saying, stupidity. After 4 years of his stupidity, he was able to get such a huge support. And this is because of narrow-mindedness of nationalism. And therefore, at this point, it's very important to recall this important counsel given by Maulana Azad. And that is, friends, this is one of the speech by Maulana Azad. Friends, in the advancement of the nations, there is no greater hindrance than narrow-mindedness. It is our duty to keep ourselves free from this disease in this new era of independence, which has just begun. There is no other disease so dangerous for the healthy growth of national life. It makes its appearance in every field of thought and action, and we are seeing this. It makes its appearance in every field of thought and action. Like an actor, it masquerades in disguise. And so you have this call of Achhe Din and Trump's America becoming great again. It masquerades its appearance in every field of thought and action. Like an actor, it masquerades its disguise in the domain of religion. It appears in the form of blind faith and wants to deceive us in the name of orthodoxy. In politics, it wants to overpower us in the guise of nationalism. In learning and culture, it makes an appeal to us in the name of our nation and country. It behooves us not to be taken in by these fictitious names. We must remember that the root cause of all this is nothing but narrow-mindedness, which now has become the norm. Again, he continues to say, we have, and that is particularly important for thought leaders of current time, because politicians, the otherwise leader of today's time, are not ready to listen these things. So the thought leaders who are present and who are listening, it is important for them to remember this, because maybe they will be able to ingrain this in the mind of the student, and maybe the future students will be able to carry these things. So we have to keep in mind that the nationalism propagated in the 19th century Europe is all shattered, and the world is sick of the bounds of narrow nationalism. It is anxious to break those shackles Instead of a small, cooped up nationalities, the world wants to build supranationalism. Obviously, there is no room for narrow-mindedness in this modern age. We shall find a secure place in the Committee of Nations only if, and this needs to be reminded to the people who are currently heading our country too. We shall find a secure place in the Committee of Nations when there is this call of making India great again, or the rise of a reluctant power, as if India was never willing to assume the leadership, as if India never assumed the leadership role in non-aligned movement and other things. So we shall find a secure place in the Committee of Nations only if we are international minded and tolerant. So only if we are international minded, nothing good is going to happen. If only we are international minded with tolerance, then we will be able to have our place in the Committee of Nations. Just one sentence, last sentence. It is possible that other nations may have to learn new lessons for broadening their outlook. And this is what Azad is saying in 1950. It is not, am I audible? Yeah, I think. It is possible that other nations may have to learn new lessons for broadening their outlook and for cultivating our spirit of tolerance. But so far as India is concerned, so far as we are concerned, we can say with pride and glory that it is the main trait of our ancient civilization, and that we have been steeped in it for thousands of years. In other countries, differences of thought and action led to mutual warfare and bloodshed. But in India, they were resolved in a spirit of compromise and toleration. Here in India, every kind of faith, every kind of culture, every mode of living was allowed to flourish and find its own salvation. And that will be the medicine for a future prosperous, nice India, not just India, but a future and prosperous world. So with this, I end, and I'm sorry for taking somewhat a bit more time. Sorry to Zoeb bhai. Thank you.
Thank you, Tehseen. As always, a pleasure listening to you, and you were kept all of us so engaged. Thank you very much. The session is now open to question and answers. If any of the participants want to ask any question to our distinguished speakers, they are most welcome. कुछ सवालात हो आप लोगों के, कोई सवाल पूछना हो तो आप पूछ सकते हैं. Any one of you?
I can see the chat box. If you can.
Yes, there is one question by Shafi Haq. Anyone who is interested in asking any question related to Azad, कोई सवाल आप लोगों का, you are most welcome to ask.
Sir, participant can unmute themselves to ask the question.
Okay, I have one question for Shauna. I just wanted to know that now, since much water has flowed since 1947, and what Azad espoused, that I think to a significant extent that got, you can say, demolished with the partition of India. I mean, when he was extolling about Hindu-Muslim unity and all those things, that somehow was not able to survive or got shattered to some extent when India got independence. And now the phase in which we are in, there is a lot of intolerance, there's a lot of, all kinds of things, lynchings and all going on. So do you think it has become difficult for the present India to reconcile Azad in modern India? Or has he been simply now taken as a figurative head, a symbol only of Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, so-called, or secularism in India? Do you agree, Shauna?
Yes and no. I feel like, of course, I think he is unfortunately taken as the figurehead of Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb. I think Azad stood for something that was far more than just that. Um, just let me take a step back and think about why Azad is still relevant. I think Azad had the foresight to see that the question of place would become central to it will become repetitive in in India's 20th century. So today, when the citizenship of India in Muslims is being questioned by saying that Muslims don't belong in India. If people from elsewhere have to come in, they can go to other Muslim countries around in India because India is a land of Hindus. The logic of the argument is pretty much along those lines, and then there are complications beyond it. But Azad had the foresight to see that this is going to be the problem. And that's why he begins to say, no, look here, we have an immense claim to this land. And even though we might be minorities to the land, we're not significant here merely because there used to be Muslim rulers in the past. We are significant because we have a lot to contribute to the world, because we have the experience of living with non Muslims, and Muslims in India can really begin to demonstrate to the world, to humanity at large, like Dr. Raza said, why Muslims living with non-Muslims or Hindu-Muslim unity is really something that the world can learn from. So um, I think Azad's decline started as an intellectual. Yeah, Azad's not just a scholar; he is truly a thinker. If you would allow me to make that distinction between a scholar and a thinker, there are many scholars in India, but there are very few thinkers during the national movement, and Azadi is one of them. And his decline as a thinker starts way before the rise of the right, of the rise of the right wing in India. Maybe it coincides in some ways, but the language of secularism in India completely sidelined or marginalized the language of Islam. And the language of Islam was Azad's language. So as much as he had to, he had this fabulous, he was clearly an institution builder. Look at all the quotes that, we heard from Dr. Raza. But, um, you know, all of that remains very much relevant to India. I think the reason why he is not taken up is because there are no translations of his work. Of the Tarjumanul Quran, there's only the translation of volume 1. There's a volume 2 and a volume 3. These are not translated. And I mean, these were his great works. And, Sahitya Academy, which is the academy that he started, is doing its founder a great disservice by not translating his works. And they have these fabulous copies. I have some of them behind, of Gubare Kater and of Azad's Tazkira. But those are the more personal works of Azad. Those were reflective of his own literary genius, not his political genius. So I feel like that's one of the things that someone needs to do. If not the government of India, which I don't think is going to pursue this task anymore, or the ICCR, which could have once done it, but the ICCR has been renovating their office in Delhi, and nobody knows where Azad's library is anymore. So in so many ways, great disservice has been done. To Azad, and it's also come from his own party. The Congress today should be talking about Azad. In Bihar, for example, look at the legacy of Azad in Bihar. He starts these Imarat-e-Sharia, you have Darul Qazas, they're part of the institutions that are very central to Muslim life in Bihar. And we find non-Congress leaders like Owaisi, who make statements similar to what Azad would make. And it's not coming from, from his own party members. So, I don't want to make an overt political position. My position is that Azad has been ignored, and doing that has been done a great disservice to not just him, but to what pluralism or the idea of India really is at that time, and doing great service to someone like Nehru as well. Yeah, sorry, I have this long answer because I have so much to say on this. So, yeah.
Shana, yes, there's one question for you from Muhammad Saif. He says that what was Azad's take on the caliphate system and how he looked this system of caliphate is crucial for today.
Oh, that's a big question, and I think in many ways, thank you for this. I'm struggling with this question myself. I think the first thing is that Azad viewed the caliphate as a universal system. He's very clear that it means representation. And, the institution of the caliphate is acts as the representative of God on earth. So, and he says that, the caliphate originally as a system is something that is meant to protect liberty and not be a tyrannical institution. And over time, it has become like this. But if one were to, he has this in Kauli Faisal, he has this story about an old woman who would go up to the Khalifa and say that you're not doing your job right, and he says that it was every Muslim's duty to ensure that no one is being dominated, especially not by the Khalifa. So Azad sees the caliphate as being at the center of Islam, and there is a text which is very available today. If some of you write to me, I can send you a scan of the text. It's called Azad's Defense of the Caliphate, which is called Jaziratul Arab, and it is translated in English by Abdul Beg, and Gandhi commissions its translation after Azad gives a defense of the caliphate in the 1920s. But of course, the caliphate collapses, and then it's dismembered, and Azad is sort of left to pick up the pieces of his argument in some ways. So he argues that we should have a system based on an Imarate Sharia, which could be a system where the Sharia could be practiced. And eventually these form the Darul Qazas in India. But that system is not necessarily central to what is the political in India. It remains important to the lives of Muslims, but how many non-Muslims know about Darul Qazas? They only know about it when people like Vishwalochan Madan go to court. The caliphate was crucial to Azad's political thinking, and it endures in his political thought. But once history beats it down, Azad has to turn his focus elsewhere, and that's why the nation becomes important in many ways.
Yes, any more questions? If any of आप लोगों को सवालात हो तो आप पूछ सकते हैं. The question session is going on. Okay, I guess no, none of you have any now further questions. Anyway,
I have a question to Dr. Raza, if I can ask my question. Thank you, Dr. Raza. It's just fascinating set of topics that you bring up, and it just goes to show the breadth of Azad's thinking on so many issues. I want to ask you, today, if we were to think of where Azad is, he's not in the sites of institutional power. He is in Shaheen Bagh on the street. I was in many protests in Karnataka in December when I was in India then, and people were holding up posters of Azad when they were protesting. So Azad is primarily a figure today who's present in sites of protest, not in institutional spaces. And we know him so much. We're celebrating him today on National Education Day for being someone who was an institutional figure, as the first education minister of India, etc. We don't remember him as much for being a person who was of movements. He's part of the Khilafat movement, non-cooperation. He's there at the Quit India movement. His wife dies when he's in prison after the Quit India movement, and he can't leave prison. And um, there is not much thinking of him as someone who is a leader of movements. We always think of him as someone who's an institutional figure. Do you think this characterization is right? And if it is, then how can movements places like Shine Bagh, places like Park Circus begin to revive Azad's revolutionary thought as a leader of movements as opposed to leader of institutions?
Thank you, Shona. Nice of you. And when a scholar of Azad studies ask this question from someone who just have a cursory understanding of Azad as one of the freedom fighters, and from the point of view of national movement. Yes, you're right. Azad as someone who has been caricatured in such a manner that the real Azad uh, seems not to have much what you can say gaze in the real sense of the term, in terms of the institutional taking up of those ideas. And I think, being a student of political science, I can say that uh, it is actually part of this being so is because of the manner in which the post partition politics has come to be played in the Indian nation. The thing is, when finally, see, you may correct me, Azad was the one person who didn't agree to partition till the end. He finally, I was reading somewhere that when finally he had a talk with Nehru and other people, then he was so disillusioned that he went to Gandhi. And when he went to Gandhi and he talked with Gandhi, and he saw that even Gandhi is ready to, is for whatever reasons, have accepted this reality. Then he became a very, very, very disillusioned and very, you can say, a heartbroken man that way. So part of the reason that he is selectively portrayed in the post independent India is because of the fact that the type of politics which gained ground in post independent India did not offer, to be very honest, much scope for a person like Azad to be taken in the manner in which he should have been taken. When I'm saying that, I'm making a very bold statement. But see what has happened. There has actually came the existence of the fruition of the coming to fruit of an idea, which was uh, opposed tooth and nail by this person, and finally that idea comes to fruition. And this inherent tussle is evident by Azar's own thought, because the manner in which he was very proactively doing the things in times before the actual partition of the country, and the manner in which he was doing things post a partition. For example, the number of the political rallies addressed by Azad whenever some sort of elections or something like this were being on. The manner in which the center stage was actually taken uh, by, 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 by other people. So I will not say that Congress I cannot dare to say this, that Congress deliberately did this, because I don't have the real evidence that way. But the thing is, somewhere when you become a heartbroken man, so what you are doing, you are going to see the courts which I have met, that actually most of the courts are from the ceremonial addresses of Azad. Ceremonial in the sense that he was education minister, so he was invited to speak on the establishment of this and that. And he was of late not very active participant in the debates too that way. Maybe you will correct me, because I have not gone into much details of the actual participation of Azad, because he remained mum on the issue of reservation of Muslims too. He was not very vocal. He, as far as I have studied, I need to do more studies on this, and you may correct me. The advisory committee for the minorities' rights, which presented its reports to the Home Minister, in that committee's deliberations, Azad didn't put his weight in respect to his own stature, and and it was voiced by others too, that for most of the time he kept mum. So the thing is, it's a politics, an active politics. You have to very bluntly put it this way, you have to actively put yourself in the forefront too. So the moment you allow the space to be taken away, I'm not putting the blame on Azad himself, because there are not many forces that led to the happening of such a thing. But Azad actually, it was not the same Azad, I will say. Before the Azad of Al-Bilal, Al-Hilal, Al-Bala, and the other revolutionary potential. So the Azad of post-independent India was, in a sense, different. Azad, maybe age had to do, maybe his maybe losing ground will have to do. But these in no way lessen the stature. And in order how to reclaim Azad, I think everyone has done an injustice to Azad, because the manner in which he, particularly in for our institution, Aligarh Muslim University, is generally in the popular discourse, it is said that he was opposed to because something very nasty happened when he came to Aligarh sometime. But credit goes to this person, actually, who was instrumental in maintaining the existence of the institution in the post-partition era, because all were hell-bent, and of course to Nehru, all were hell-bent in closing this institution. So Azad, I think, is not credited rightfully for the things which he did. And I think the manner in which he has been painted by, because yes, if you go through the cartoons of Dawn was a newspaper, and the cartoons of Azad, I thought of making use of some of those cartoons. So if you will see the caricatures of Azad made by the Critic, that was a paper run by, or ideologically supported by League. So the manner in which he has presented, see, Azad was sitting as a support, as a tool, and on that tool, Nehru was standing, and Nehru was putting a nail in the coffin of Pakistan. See, there is this cart, and in that cart, the bullock is presented in the form of Azad, and a old Azad, a forlorn Azad, a weak Azad, who is turning back and saying that no, mujhse ye nahi hoga, main aage nahi ja payenge. So the manner in which it has been, and that has not been responded to with equal vigor, with equal fervor, with equal force by us, I will say, by Indians. So I think part of the problem that we have not been able to reclaim Azad in the manner in which he should be has a lot to do with the institutional manner of not giving him his due. And part also is to the, I will say, because till now there is only, you may correct me, there is only one good biography of him by some Western scholar, Alan, whatever he is. And the second is done by Sayyada Hamid. So a person like, and see, contrast it with the number of literature on Nehru, for example, or even Vallabhbhai Patel, or on others. So 2, 3, 4 books only on Azad. This despite the fact that you were right that he was instrumental in founding Sahitya Academy. So I think there is a need to reclaim the ideas, because nowadays it's very important for us to stand for, because the ideas which he espoused, those are eternal ideas, and those are the ideas for ultimate redemption. Because if we not follow, we are all going to descend to doom. So it's in our interest, in the interest of everyone, to reclaim him in the manner he is. And I think I have not fully answered your question. And Zoepai, I think there was another question by I saw that in the chat box by
Yeah, by Muhammad Saif, I think.
yeah. So,
He's referring that question to Shauna actually.
yes. Okay,
He's
Shauna, I think I'm not fully. This would not have convinced you fully, but my understanding of Azad is not that deep. So maybe we'll continue discussion later on. Mail.
No, of course, I think it's not a question of conviction, convincing me. I'm convinced, I'm a big fan of Azad.
You're a true scholar.
Um, but something that strikes me, and I'll come to Seb's question, Mohammed Seb's question. But I think by and large, when we think about minority leaders in India, there are very few leaders who come from minority communities, who are studied by people who are not from that community. And Ambedkar, has begun to stand out as one of those leaders. Azad has not been taken up beyond a small group of scholars, in Jamia, and primarily who live in Jamia Nagar as well. And of course, there are people who write about him elsewhere. But and, in America, there is a lot of scholarship on Azad. Often, when I tell Islamic scholars in America that I'm working on Azad, they tell me, "But there is so much written on him already," and I'm like, "Really? Where is all this writing?" Because it's not easy to find writing on Azad, and there is a perception that there is a lot written on him because he was such a big figure. So there's a deep irony there. There's nothing written on him while he was so prominent a figure. Just to respond to Mohammed Saif's questions. How do I look at the compatibility of the nation state system and Sharia? I think this is a big question, and I'm a student of Bail Halak. I don't study under him directly, but he's in my department, and he's the reason that I joined this department. And Halak would say that it's difficult. The Sharia was based on a pre-modern system, and you could read his book, The Impossible State, where he talks about what is foundational to the Sharia is the idea of God as sovereign. And, in the nation state, it is the nation that is the sovereign. It's the people nation that is sovereign. And therefore, there is a fundamental incompatibility. Azad is an interesting figure because he is constantly trying to build that compatibility. And he manages to do so in a very peculiar way, in somehow, sort of latching on to the colonial state system of non-interference in religion. So he will constantly, even during the Khilafat movement, for example, he would say, if you truly believe that you should not interfere, if you truly believe that secularism is an important liberal value, then you should not interfere in the religious concerns of Muslims. And what is primary to religious concerns of Muslims is the Khalifa. So for Azad, the questions of Sharia are foundational, but Sharia is not Islam. Islam is more than Sharia, and he's very clear about this. So Islam is not law. Which is not the case for Professor Halak. For Professor Halak, they're the same. And I'm referring to him because I do consider him to be one of the biggest scholars on Sharia. So this is the sort of eventually Azad sort of provides many solutions to India, India's issues, India's own concerns with Sharia and how to implement it. And that gives rise to the Darul Qaza network in India, which is protected by the All India Muslim Personal Law Board. That's that's on Azad's question. If I could just say one thing, on this earlier question by Shafi Haq, which was how did Azad see Muslims' participation in politics and what was his guidance for Muslims in divided India? This is a fundamental question to Azad. So could I just take it up, Professor Hassan?
Yeah, sure. You can.
In many pieces, at least 3 or 4 pieces, including some which were quoted today, Kauli Faisal, a lot of pieces in the Al-Hilal, Azad says that Muslims need to come out of, and I'm quoting him, their slavery in the political domain. And who are they slaves to? I mean, it's the obvious question. Who are Muslim slaves to in the political domain? And he says that for too long Muslims have been, accept the rulers, of us, of the place that they live in, because this is the Islamic way to live. You accept the rule of the ruler, of the rulers. But what they don't understand is by accepting the rule of, if the ruler's rule is unjust, then there is a greater emphasis in Islam to ensure that Muslims speak up against unjust, against injustice. So, in Kauli Faisal, if you don't read Urdu, you can read the translations. There's one in Saida Hamid, Saida Hamid's ICCR volume on Azad. He says that Muslims need to come out of their slavery and join hands with those who are fighting for Swaraj. And therefore his solution for Muslims is not to say, go ahead and tell the world that you're nationalist, go ahead and say that you are Indians. This is not Azad's solution. There are other people who say this, and it's attributed to Azad, but he doesn't say it. It's attributed to him probably because he's close to these people. Azad's solution is, this is the Islamic way of living, and that is something that can be useful and beneficial for everyone in Indian society. Indian society doesn't have to be scared of Islam because Islam has constituted it. And therefore, you don't have to say that you're a nationalist in order to join politics. You just have to say, I'm a Muslim and I find this unjust, and therefore I'm going to be part of it. So non-dominance is very crucial to his mode of thinking. And I find that use of the term "don't be slaves" in the political domain very fascinating, because he says that there are many different terms for slavery in the world, but not being able to voice your opinion when you're faced by an unjust government is the worst kind. He remains relevant today, as relevant as ever. And I wish more people who were going to jail, many of these students, for example, I wish they will be reading Azad when they are in jail. And I feel that maybe Sharjeel and Umar, they were my peers when I was in JNU. I feel somewhat assured that they might be doing the same thing that Azad did when he was in jail, probably reading and writing on why they don't need to prove that they're good Muslims, that they're good nationalists. They need to prove that maybe they're good Muslims to themselves, but they don't need to prove that they're good nationalists in order to be questioning the government. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Shana, and thank you, Tehseen. It has been a very enlightening, very insightful talk, and I hope that in future also we will be organizing more and more such talks on people who are less studied and who have been less understood by a general population in India. I would just like to mention one thing, that when I was reading Douglas' book on Azad, which I was discussing with Shauna the other day, Douglas has ended that book with a very marked line. He says that he was a sadly misunderstood man, but one who with the best of will is hard to understand. The attempt must be, however, made because of the significance of what he stood for. So these are the concluding lines of Douglas in his autobiography of, biography of Abul Kalam Azad. Plus, there are certain reservations of M.O. Mathai on Maulana Azad. I don't know how far he was prejudiced or he was very genuine, that he says that Maulana Azad was sometimes a vindictive man also. And to that extent that Tehseen mentioned about Azad, Pakistan and all, there's a one very image of Azad who is offering Fatiha on the grave of Jinnah. That picture is there on Google Images, you can find it. And now I've heard that he's being studied in Pakistan also, Abul Kalam Azad. They are now rediscovering Maulana Azad. It's not like that he's someone who is ridiculed or someone who has been told, as Jinnah said, that she is showboy. His thought is now being studied there also, in Pakistan also. So I think these are some of the good signs, and hopefully in future also Shauna is doing her work, and more will come from her on Azad so that it becomes known to all of us. Thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank my management, Anjuman Khairul Islam, Pune College, the trustees, the chairman, for giving us this opportunity, our principal, Dr. Professor Aftab Anwar Sheikh, our vice principal, Professor Muhyiddin Khan, and all the participants who joined, who registered for this International Web Symposium. And last not the least, to our distinguished speakers. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Tehseen, for sparing your valuable time for us and enlightening us on someone whose birth anniversary is today and who is our country's first education minister. And it is imperative that he is known, especially to the young breed, to the students and everyone, that what kind of man he was. On this note, I once again thank you all, and I also thank my college for making this symposium a grand success. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Should I close the meeting then?
Close. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
ये लोग को तो बड़ा खामखा की लग जाती है।
क्लोज हुआ नहीं।
हो रहा है, एक एक करके छूट रहे हैं हम लोग।
लीव कर दें।